It's not every day that I come onto this channel and say I have good things to say about ESPN or FS1 or any, cable hot take sports show, because I know a lot of the time on this channel we kind of poke fun at some of the misinformed things or some of the weird things that people say on those networks, especially when it comes to the Cleveland Browns or any team that we're real familiar with. And we have fun making fun of them. But if I'm going to do that, I do have to, do the same or keep the same energy when somebody comes on ESPN and they're saying stuff that makes a ton of sense that I actually do agree with. I have to be able to signal boost those guys as much as I signal boost the people who, say things that are easy to hate against. So this is something I have not done in quite a while, but let's listen to ESPN. This is Marcus Spears. And I really do agree with everything that he has to say about Odell and how he gets treated and how he gets talked about. He just comes flat out there on Get Up and says a lot of things. I think a lot of people who have been on this side of the argument with me have been thinking for quite a while. So let's put this clip on. And
OBJ coming back. Will this actually be a good thing or a bad thing for the Browns? What is your take?
Yeah. My take is to stop trying to create a narrative that doesn't exist. And the player you were talking about that I played with was Terrell Owens. And it was this, it always seemed to be this narrative that people were trying to create about what type of teammate he was and what the goals were and how did he focus on his job. Played with him, he was a team guy. And most of the guys that you talk to, and the only reason I say most of the guys, because the guys that you have access to that play with T.O. will tell you the same thing. And I feel like this has been something that's been tried and tried over and over again to attach to Odell Beckham Jr. We had a conversation about Baker not being good because he was on the field.
Before he gets into that, and that's going to be an excellent point, the base assumption about Odell has been something I've talked about for quite a while that I feel like has been wildly, not disingenuous, but uncharitable to Odell, right? This perception that he's a diva, this perception that he's crying for the ball or that he's forcing quarterbacks to throw him the football, it's really not based in anything in reality. This perception, and this is the most unfair perception he got thrown on because he doesn't deserve this at all. He's never done anything, maybe outside of like one or two things, right? The field goal kicking thing, which it is what it is. People do that all the time in football where they have a freak out on the sideline, but we tend to make a bigger deal when some players do it versus when other players do it. Peyton Manning used to have those kind of freak outs all the time. Tom Brady regularly kind of did those things in New England. It's not a big deal when they do it, but, Odell does it. It does become a big deal for whatever reason. And then also this bad teammate thing, which I've always found outlandish because you've never met a single guy who's played with Odell Beckham that has nothing but good things to say about him, right? Like they say he's a great practice player. He's a great example. He helps rookies. He's a model teammate. He's never been anything but that. And this ideal that he's this locker room malcontent that's going to poison your young players is a really weird assumption to make about a dude who has never had any of those type of issues. He's never been suspended for anything off the field. He's never been suspended, period, in his NFL career. He's never really had off the field drama, but yet Odell, to some people, they talk about him as if he comes with this baggage of a Josh Gordon or an Antonio Callaway, people who have legitimately gotten suspended or cost the team in some off the field way. That's never been Odell. But yet he deals with this as if this is a reality with him when it's never even been close to him. So Marcus is right to point out that one. Let's see what else he has to say about the Odell and Baker thing.
And somehow that was turning into that being his fault. And we talked about how OBJ, the stuff that he did on the sideline, like players in the NFL ain't been doing that since the beginning of damn time. But the bottom line is this. OBJ is back. And the narrative cannot be created about a player, especially when we have so much access to him, that's not true. And I haven't heard players come out and say OBJ is a problem. I haven't heard anybody talk about how hard he works, his work ethic, anything like that. So, look, and the only reason I'm saying this, G, is because last year when we were having this conversation, it somehow became that OBJ was a problem because Baker Mayfield wasn't playing well. It was because Baker Mayfield and Kevin Stefanski was starting new, and it was figuring things out.
That is so key that he brings up there. Again, when people talk about the number, right, where they're like, oh, Odell and Baker, they had this amount of interceptions versus when Odell wasn't out there, in 2018 and 2020. And it's just cherry picking data, Again, Brett Coleman had a great video on this. If you want to dig deep into this whole situation, Brett Coleman did a very good video on it. But also, one of the things that goes into this is, think about the years you're cherry picking when you're talking about Odell and Baker, right? You're cherry picking the year where Baker had, one of the better rookie years in recent NFL history, where he broke the rookie touchdown record. And then you're cherry picking that from the year where he went 11-5. You're putting the burden of 2019 essentially on Odell when you look at it like that. And that wasn't on Odell. He had to play in an offense where the offensive coordinator and the head coach didn't trust each other, weren't believing in each other, where your offensive coordinator was telling people how incompetent your head coach was before games, before they even played. Like, if anybody deserves mulligans for those years, it's definitely Odell and it's definitely Baker Mayfield. So if we can acknowledge this, especially when we talk about Baker Mayfield, because there are some Browns fans who take Baker's side and do acknowledge that 2019 was a special kind of level of a mess, but then put all that burden still on Odell when it goes both ways, right? Odell and Baker both went through that terrible offense, both went through that dysfunction, and they both suffered because of that. And that's why their numbers were so terrible, because they've only played one full season together, and it was literally in the worst situation possible. First year together in an incompetent offense with an offensive coordinator who is battling with your offensive head coach. It's a absolute mess. Like that, it plays such a big factor whenever you see those graphics that people are like, oh, Baker threw all these interceptions to Odell. That's not really the case. If you look at the tape from last year, Baker wasn't even forcing the ball to Odell. Some would argue that Baker didn't throw the ball to Odell enough because there were a lot of times where Odell was open that Baker wasn't looking for him. And the difference between the Baker we saw at the beginning of the season, which was okay, good enough to win, but not necessarily anything we would call a franchise quarterback, to the Baker we saw at the end of the year, who was no doubt a franchise quarterback, good enough to pick up that first half of the season and still finish in the top 10 when it came to QBR and Pro Football Focus grades, if those mean anything to you. And it should, because QBR, whether you like the stat or not, whether it's pointing up your guy up or propping your guy up or not, the fact is that most quarterbacks who win MVP usually finish number one in QBR. That means something. Pro Football Focus grades, they usually hold up. There's some outliers every once in a while, but they usually hold up to scrutiny. So these things are legitimate tests of when you want to say Baker's a top 10 quarterback, you have that evidence. But that's the difference. Baker had a competent coach. Baker was able to stay with that competent coach and learn in that system. Odell got hurt in week 6. And we know that Odell would have had success in this offense because Donovan Peoples-Jones had success in this offense, and he played the same position. Rashard Higgins had a lot of success in this offense, and he ended up having to play a similar position to Odell. And they're both not as talented as Odell Beckham, not as good as route runners as Odell Beckham, especially Donovan Peoples-Jones at that point in his career. Maybe in the future that changes, but rookie year, Donovan Peoples-Jones, not the crisp route runner that Odell was. And how quickly do we forget that Odell was a part of so many of the victories early on this season, right? Indy, he was huge in that game. Dallas, he was absolutely instrumental in that game. And then when you look at some of the key losses that the Browns have, mainly the game against Baltimore, the second one on Monday Night Football, and then you look at the Kansas City game, what were they missing? A dynamic wide receiver, somebody who can get open on tough man press coverage. They just didn't have it. Rashard Higgins is great. He's not that kind of receiver. Jarvis Landry is great. He's not that kind of receiver. The only one you had on your roster was Odell. He wasn't there. Your team suffered because of that, because he was hurt. But somehow this has turned into, and it's not just national media guys doing this, it's also people who cheer for the Browns doing this, that Odell is the blame for it. And for Browns fans, I kind of get it, right? Because you're kind of looking for anything to pop the bubble on this dream, because it feels crazy that the Browns are good. So Odell's the one outlier, and he's kind of an unknown to you, so you think that's going to be what bursts this bubble. But in all reality, you have Odell on your roster at $13 million. That's a tremendous deal for the next 2 years, and he looks great coming off that injury. He should be fine. We should be excited about Odell, but there's this weird kind of hesitation when we talk about Odell, because for whatever reason, people have convinced themselves that he's not a great teammate, or he's not a team player, or that he has to be placated, when like literally none of these things have been proven to be true, not even remotely. And it's just really unfair that he kind of has to deal with that. Now let's see what else that Marcus had to say.
I want OBJ on my team based on the things that I know about him, and guys that have played with him will tell you about him. So, I'm not going to say let us. I'm not standing for anybody creating a narrative because OBJ is coming back that it's going to become an issue because he's on offense and he's going to either be demanding the ball or Baker Mayfield going to take a step back. It's just not true, and not the way that he operates or people around him operates. This will fit in well. It's a better understanding of Kevin Stefanski's offense. OBJ understands his role in this offense, and that's to be dynamic as he's been when he's been on the field. So I'm going to leave it at that. I ain't letting this narrative get created that it's going to be an issue when OBJ comes back to play wide receiver for the Browns. It's going to be a plus and an add.
All right.
Hey, those are strong words, man. It's almost like I was out there on ESPN defending Odell and Baker and everything out there. Like, you can't really ask for much. And I know with Marcus Spears, people are going to say, oh, well, he went to LSU, so he's biased towards that. Yeah, I mean, sure, he does have a reason to kind of defend Odell. But the fact that he went to LSU doesn't just mean, oh, he's just going to defend him. You know, he's been critical of guys who have been at LSU. And, you know, like, to be fair, he knows people who have played with Odell, both in college, both in the NFL, and it's true. You don't hear any players complaining about Odell, but there's this weird perception amongst fans that Odell's this diva or Odell's this locker room malcontent, and it's just 100% unfair. If he was Antonio Brown behind the scenes, we would know, because those reports would be out, because everything that Odell does gets reported, right? If he were flipping tables, cussing out Baker Mayfield, being a bad influence on rookies, trust me, they would be leading First Take with that information. But what has Odell led these sports talk shows with? He wore a watch one time. He wore a visor one time. He got his teeth done. Like, this is the things that we talk about with Odell in the absence of anything really substantive. And we're using that garbage that does not support the narrative that they're trying to build to support the narrative that Odell is this malcontent that's going to affect Baker Mayfield. The fact of the matter is that this should work out. I don't think Baker's issues in the beginning of the season was that he was trying to get the ball to Odell too much. I think Baker's issues at the beginning of the season last year, and again, we say issues like he was terrible at the beginning of the season. He wasn't terrible at the beginning of the season, but his issues at the beginning of the season were much more about him not wanting to pull the trigger quick enough, not trusting what he's seeing, not trusting what the offense is giving him, and that affecting his ability to kind of gunsling. And eventually, as the season went on, as he got more comfortable, maybe when Odell went out and they were down against Cincinnati, maybe it went off in his head that his back was against the wall and that the Browns lose. This ain't going to be on Nick Chubb. This ain't going to be on Odell because they both didn't play that game. It was going to be on Baker, and it made him be more decisive, right? Maybe that's something that factored into it. But I don't see why he can't continue to be as decisive and as comfortable in his offense just because OBJ is out there. That doesn't make much sense to me. Sometimes the answer to your question is the least complicated one in front of you. And what's more complicated? The ideal that Baker Mayfield is so intimidated by the presence of Odell Beckham that he turns into a worse quarterback and that he can't function when Odell's out there because of something about Odell's aura, or the fact that he just wasn't comfortable in the offense. Odell went out. He was down against the Bengals. He had just threw a pick, and he knew his back was against the wall. So he felt like he had no other choice but to trust the offense at that point. And then once he trusted it, had 22 straight completions and 5 touchdowns trusting the offense, all of a sudden it became a lot easier for him to get comfortable in the offense because he knew it would be successful. Because remember, in 2019, he trusted that offense. He threw 20 picks. So he was kind of hesitant to trust an offense after that point. And you can see it at the beginning of the year. I did multiple film breakdowns at the beginning of the year on this channel where I pointed out Baker doesn't look comfortable. Baker doesn't look like he's just pulling the trigger right when he sees it. He looks like he's hesitant. He looks like he's waiting. And at the end of the year, well, as I said, he looks like he's pulling the trigger. He looks like he's not hesitant. That was the difference. And I think it's very likely that Odell coming back doesn't really change that, but enhances that. So that's my thoughts on the situation. I think Marcus Spears deserves a round of applause and a pat on the back because he really did an excellent job defending against a false narrative that we know we're going to have to fight against during the season when it comes to Odell. Everybody wants to come at Odell. So I appreciate that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.